Welcome, dear listeners, to a world of ancient sands and whispered secrets, where the night wraps softly around us and dreams drift like desert winds. Tonight we journey alongside Prince Kian, a restless soul in search of truths hidden beyond the palace walls, beneath a sky vast and endless. Close your eyes and allow yourself to drift to a place where time itself speaks, where shadows reveal secrets, and where every grain of sand holds a memory. Breathe deeply, letting go of the day's thoughts. Now, our journey begins. Prince Kian was a man of restlessness and royal blood, a paradox wandering his kingdom's borders, as if seeking something beyond his title, beyond the palatial walls. By day, he fulfilled his duties, making decisions for his people, smiling for his mother's pride and his father's legacy. Yet, at night, the prince's heart craved mystery. It beat not for the luxury of his station, but for whispers in the wind and glances from the shadows. And one night, those murmurs took him into the desert, far from the courts and courtiers who knew him. Under a sky so vast seemed to breathe, Kian walked beyond his kingdom's reach. He sought the unknown, drawn by rumors of an ancient phenomenon, one said to arise only when the moon grew red, bleeding its light across the sand like a god's forgotten wound. With each step, he let the cool night air wrap around him, the grains of sand marking his path like stardust beneath his feet. The deeper he went, the louder the stillness grew, echoing with secrets he had never been meant to hear. And then he saw it. The desert, endless moments ago, so plain and grey, shifted, as if unveiling a hidden kingdom. Before him stretched an expanse of sands like no other, a glimmering wasteland bathed in the moon's eerie crimson. The grains shimmered, each one catching the light as if embedded with glass or forged from the embers of dying stars. They glowed in strange, vibrant colours that twisted and changed with every breath he took, as though they were alive and whispering back to the moon. Kian stopped, his heart both yearning and wary. He knew the stories, of course. His nursemaid, an old woman with a voice like dried leaves, had once told him of the glistening sands. Those who walk those sands, she had murmured in her hoarse tones, see what has been and what will be, but not without a price. For the sands do not care for kings or princes. They answer only to time. He'd scoffed then, a child's pride undeterred by the fears of an old woman. Yet here he was, facing the fabled sands, and he felt a chill that the night wind could not have stirred. Unbidden, his feet carried him forward, drawn by something beyond curiosity, beyond even courage, an unquenchable thirst for the unknown. He barely felt the weight of each step as he approached the heart of the desert. He could see nothing past the flickering sands, could not hear the breeze that had always sung in the night air. Here, There was only silence and the sand's glistening surface, shifting and twisting in mesmerizing patterns. And then he heard her, a voice, like silk over stone, a whisper that wrapped itself around his mind. Prince Kian. He looked up, though he knew he would find no mortal face, no familiar gaze. Instead, before him stood a figure cloaked in silver that shimmered as if spun from the very sands themselves. Her face was hidden, yet her presence was absolute, timeless. She was the oracle of the sands, guardian of the desert's secrets, and keeper of all things bound to time. "Do you know where you stand?" she asked, her voice both young and old, echoing through the desert's dark heart. "I have heard tales," Kian replied, his voice steadier than he felt. But they were only tales. Tales! The oracle's laugh was a ripple of dark water under moonlight. "Nothing here is only a tale, my prince. These sands hold the memory of every heartbeat, every breath, every death and life ever to have walked this earth." Kian watched her, feeling a pulse deep within him, a strange pull that felt like both an invitation and a warning. He could taste his own desire to know, a hunger he could not name, pressing him to step forward. And she knew. The oracle watched him with eyes that did not seem to blink, did not seem to belong to her or anyone at all. "Do you wish to see?" she asked, raising her hand. "Do you wish to see what lies behind the veils of the time, Prince Kian?" A thrill ran down his spine, like lightning caught in his blood. He thought of his childhood dreams, of the legends his people told, of the questions he had never dared ask, even to himself. And here, beneath this otherworldly moon, with this figure standing like a gatekeeper to worlds unknown, he found his answer. "Yes," he whispered, barely audible, his breath caught between fear and wonder. The oracle's face did not move, yet he felt her approval, like a dark flower blooming in the night. "Then know this, Prince Kian. The sands reveal freely, but do not let go without a cost. Each glimpse will take something from you, be it a memory, a dream, a piece of your soul's past or its future." Kian did not hesitate. There was nothing he feared losing more than the secrets hidden beyond this night. With a slight nod, he stepped into the shimmering desert, feeling the weight of the oracle's gaze like 1,000 years upon his shoulders. The sands shifted beneath him, and in the corner of his eye, he glimpsed something, a flicker of light, a wisp of another world, as though he were falling into time itself. His heart quickened, and he felt the world around him change as he took his first step into the mysteries of the glistening sands. The air grew dense and strange as Kian moved deeper into the heart of the desert. The sands shifted like living things, curling and weaving around his feet, as though they were beckoning him onward, or perhaps warning him away. Each step seemed heavier than the last, each grain of sand a weight of untold years pressing upon him. And yet, he could not turn back, not with the oracle's gaze upon him, her eyes like twin abysses that drank in all light, all time. As he walked, he felt the presence of the oracle by his side, though he could no longer see her. Her voice, dark and winding as the desert itself, wove into the air like an incantation. Every step you take, Prince Kian, brings you closer to the heart of time. These sands were formed from the remnants of forgotten ages, from lives long lost and dreams unfulfilled. Each grain is a memory, each spark of light, a fragment of 1,000 moments. Kian could feel her words stirring something within him, a faint ache he couldn't place, a hollow yearning that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the sands beneath his feet. He wanted to ask her questions, yet he sensed that this place was beyond words, beyond mortal understanding. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, a fragile thread connecting his wonder to her knowledge. The oracle continued, her voice low and somber. You are not the first to walk these sands. Many before you have come, seeking what lies hidden in time. Some search for answers to their pasts, others for glimpses of their futures. But the sands do not answer to desire. They reveal only on what you are ready to see, and take only with what you are willing to lose. Kian's heart quickened. He could feel the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. What would he lose? What pieces of himself would be taken by the sands, slipping through his fingers like dreams upon waking? Yet he knew he could not turn away. The mystery of the sands pulled at him, a siren song calling to the part of him that craved knowledge, that sought answers to questions he had not even dared to ask. The oracle halted beside him, her form barely visible in the moonlight. Her gaze turned toward the shifting sands before them, where shadows coiled and flickered, forming shapes and patterns that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. She raised a slender, ghostly hand and traced a path through the air, her fingers drawing symbols that glowed faintly before fading back into the night. This is your first threshold, Prince Kian, she said, her voice softer now, almost tender. Beyond this point, you will see moments that no living eyes were meant to witness. You may find pieces of yourself scattered among the sands, fragments of lives you have lived and lives you have yet to live. Kian nodded, his throat tight, his words caught somewhere between fear and anticipation. He was no longer sure if he was a prince or a pilgrim, if this was a journey or a trial. He felt like something smaller, like a leaf caught in the eddies of a great, endless river. A single thread in a tapestry so vast it defied comprehension. The oracle's gaze softened, and for a moment he thought he glimpsed sadness in her eyes, a sorrow so deep it seemed bound to the sands themselves, a sorrow that was beyond words, beyond time. You may find, she whispered, that time is not the healer men believe it to be. It can be as cruel as it is kind, as unforgiving as it is infinite. She gestured for him to step forward, and with a deep breath, Kian crossed the invisible threshold, his heart pounding as he felt the world around him shift. Suddenly the sands began to swirl faster, spiraling upward into a haze of golden light. Kian shielded his eyes, yet he couldn't turn away. In the swirling sands, he saw images taking shape, faint at first like shadows cast by a dying fire, but then sharper, clearer. Faces appeared, strangers and loved ones alike, their eyes full of forgotten dreams and unspoken fears. He saw warriors charging into battle, their swords flashing under the blood-red moon. He saw his father, younger than he had ever known him, standing upon a hill. His face lit with determination and sorrow. Each image flickered like a spark before dissolving back into the sands, but each left a mark upon Kian, a strange sense of connection to lives he had never lived, to moments he had never experienced. He felt their pain, their joy, their losses and triumphs, as though they were his own. The oracle's voice echoed through the sands, a faint, ghostly murmur. These are but fragments, glimpses of lives woven into the fabric of time. They are your past, your present, your future, and yet they belong to no one. The sands reveal only what they choose, only what you are willing to see. Kian tried to reach out, to touch the faces that drifted before him, but they melted away, slipping through his fingers like water. He felt a strange pang, an emptiness that grew with each image, as though a part of him were fading with them, lost in the sands. And then he saw her, a woman with a face he recognized yet did not know, her eyes dark and fathomless, her expression filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. She reached out to him, her hand hovering just out of reach, her gaze holding his with an intensity that pierced his heart. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. But the image faded before she could answer, and the sands closed around him once more, leaving him alone, the oracle's watchful gaze upon him, and the echo of her words hanging in the air. "These are only the first of the glimpses, Prince Kian. Step carefully, for the sands do not return what they take." Prince Kian stood amid the glistening sands, the ghostly echoes of the faces he had seen still lingering in the air around him. He felt hollow, as if the visions had carved pieces from him, taking fragments of his heart and memory and scattering them across the desert. Each step he took felt heavier, laden with a strange sorrow that seemed to seep into his bones. He walked slowly, watching the sand swirl and shift with each movement. The visions came without warning, appearing in the corner of his eye like shadows, then sharpening into images that burned into his mind. He saw moments of his own life replayed with a startling clarity, a forgotten birthday from his childhood, the scent of the wild jasmine his mother had braided into his hair, the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder as he learned to hold a sword. Each memory was vivid, but as he reached out to touch them, to hold these fleeting glimpses, they slipped through his fingers, leaving only the faintest trace in his mind. He could feel them slipping away, like grains of sand carried off by the wind. With each memory that faded, he felt himself drifting further from who he had once been, as though he were losing not only pieces of his past, but pieces of his very self. A laugh echoed through the desert, faint and mocking. He turned, searching for its source, and there, among the sands, he saw a boy, a younger version of himself, no older than 8, with eyes wide and filled with wonder. The boy looked at him, his face alight with a mixture of excitement and innocence that Kian barely recognized. "Do you remember, Kian?" the boy asked, his voice light and unburdened. "Do you remember the night you climbed the castle walls to see the stars?" Kian's heart clenched. He remembered that night, though it had slipped to the edges of his memory, buried beneath years of duty and responsibility. He remembered how he had stayed up, watching the stars and wondering if they held secrets he could one day uncover. "Yes," he whispered, the words barely a breath. But as he reached out to touch the memory, the image of the boy began to dissolve, the sands consuming it until it was nothing more than a faint shimmer on the horizon. The oracle's voice, distant and haunting, drifted through the silence. "The sands do not return what they take, Prince Kian. Each memory you see is yours, yet it slips further from your grasp with every moment you spend here." Kian clenched his fists, a sense of loss rising within him like a wave. He had thought himself strong, thought he could withstand whatever price the sands demanded. But this slow unraveling of his own life, of his own memories, was like watching his soul disintegrate before his eyes. As he moved forward, the visions grew darker, more haunting. He saw a version of himself standing on a battlefield, his face hardened and lined with years he had not yet lived. Blood streaked his armor, and his eyes held a weight he could not yet understand. He felt a shudder run through him as he watched his future self lift his sword, his gaze cold and distant as he led his men forward into the heart of a war he had yet to fight. He turned away, but the images continued to press upon him, one after another, a flickering procession of moments, lost and moments yet to come, all bearing the mark of sorrow and sacrifice. He saw faces he knew, his mother, aging and frail, her laughter fading into a shadow of what it had once been. His father, a look of disappointment in his eyes as he watched Kian make choices that would one day lead him down dark paths. And he saw the woman again, the one with the sad longing eyes, her hand reaching for him, as if she were calling him to a place he could never reach. "What are you showing me?" he cried. his voice lost in the vast silence of the desert. The oracle's presence was like a shadow beside him, her voice soft and relentless. The sands reveal only what you carry within you, Kian. They show you what has been and what will be, pieces of a tapestry woven with your own threads. These are your choices, your burdens, your destiny. Kian fell to his knees, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on him. The memories lost, the future he could not escape, the fragments of himself scattered across this endless desert. He wanted to scream, to push back against the inevitability of it, but he knew that he was bound, that each step he had taken had led him here, to this place where time was both a gift and a curse. He closed his eyes, letting the sand swirl around him, letting the memories slip away one by one, like stars fading from the night sky. He thought of his mother's face, of the smell of jasmine, of the laughter he had once known. He thought of the boy he had once been, so full of hope and wonder, and felt a pang of sorrow so deep it seemed to echo through his very soul. When he opened his eyes, the desert was silent once more, the visions gone, leaving only the endless stretch of sands before him, vast and glistening under the moon's pale light. He felt hollow, like a man who had walked through the fire and come out the other side with nothing but ashes. And still he rose, drawn forward by a force he could not name, by the silent promise that there was more to see, more to understand. Even if it meant losing himself piece by piece. With a final glance back at the place where his memories had scattered like dust, he took a step forward, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was both losing and finding himself in the sands of time. The desert stretched endlessly before him, each grain of sand a silent witness to countless forgotten lives and hidden futures. Prince Kian walked with a hollow heart, feeling as though his memories had been woven into the sands, each step taking another piece of his past, each vision carving away what he had once known of himself. But he pressed on, guided by something nameless, a deep compulsion that felt as inevitable as the rising of the sun, as unyielding as the passing of time. The night deepened, and with it, the sands began to glow in hues of blue and silver, casting an ethereal light around him. The stars above seemed closer, each one pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light, as if they too bore witness to his journey. Kian felt the weight of their gaze, ancient and impassive, watching as he crossed the desert of the glistening sands. In the distance, he saw the faint silhouette of a towering archway, formed from sand and stardust, shimmering with an impossible radiance. It seemed to hum with energy, an invisible thread connecting it to the sky, a doorway suspended between worlds. As he approached, he felt the air grow colder, the silence deepen into something profound and unfathomable. And there, standing before the archway, was the oracle once more. Her form shimmering like a shadow woven from moonlight. Her eyes held an intensity that seemed to pierce through him, as though she could see not only his soul, but the threads of fate that bound him. "Prince Kian," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost sorrowful. "You have come to the threshold of destiny. Beyond this point, the sands do not merely reveal, they bind. The choices you see here will shape not only your life, but the lives of countless others. Are you prepared to see the weight of your own decisions?" Kian hesitated, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. He had felt the pull of destiny before, but never as he did now. The air was thick with it, an invisible web woven around him, threads that stretched far beyond his understanding, connecting him to moments and lives he could not see. "What will I see?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The oracle's gaze grew distant, her eyes reflecting the stars. "The sands will show you the lives you will touch, the paths you will alter, the sacrifices you must bear. Each thread is a life intertwined with your own, bound by choices yet unmade. You may see sorrow, you may see joy, but know that each glimpse will reveal a truth about yourself." With a deep breath, Kian stepped forward, his heart racing as he passed through the archway, feeling an invisible barrier give way. The world around him shifted, the sands swirling into patterns that formed scenes of such clarity and depth. He felt as though he were living. He saw himself standing on a vast golden plain, his armor glinting under a blazing sun. Around him stood his people, their faces worn and weathered, yet their eyes filled with a fierce, unbreakable loyalty. He could feel the weight of their trust, their hopes pinned upon him, their faith unshaken, even as they marched toward an uncertain fate. The air was thick with the scent of earth and sweat, the sounds of preparation echoing across the plains. And there, in his own heart, he felt the burden of their lives resting upon his shoulders, a weight that was both humbling and terrifying. But then the vision changed, the sands swirling into darkness. He saw himself alone, standing in a barren hall, his face hardened with age, his eyes shadowed with memories of war and loss. The faces of those he had led, those he had loved, rose before him, each one bearing the scars of his choices. He felt a pang of guilt, a hollow ache that seemed to echo through the silence around him. He saw himself clutching a pendant in his hand, a trinket that once belonged to the woman from his visions, the one with the sad knowing eyes. Her face appeared once more, and he realized with a jolt that she was someone he would love, someone he would lose to the choices he would make. The vision blurred, shifting to another scene. This time he was standing in a lush, green valley, surrounded by fields of wildflowers. Children laughed and played, their voices bright and full of life. He saw himself older, his face softened with a peace he had not yet known, his hands reaching out to lift a small child onto his shoulders. Around him stood his people, not as soldiers, but as families, their lives woven together in harmony. And for a moment, he felt the warmth of it, the possibility of a future unmarred by war or sorrow. But the sands shifted once more, and he was pulled back into the desert, the visions dissolving into the night air, leaving him standing alone beneath the stars. His heart ached with the weight of what he had seen, the knowledge that every choice would carry consequences beyond himself, that each path led to both joy and sorrow, that every thread of his life was bound to countless others. The oracle watched him, her gaze filled with an ancient wisdom, a compassion that was almost unbearable. Now you understand, Prince Kian. The threads of destiny are woven tightly, each life bound to another, each choice shaping the world in ways we cannot foresee. This is the burden of those who walk the sands, the knowledge that every step, every word, every glance may change the course of fate. Kian looked down, his heart heavy, his soul weighed with the knowledge he had glimpsed. He could see the paths before him now, each one leading to a different future, each one carrying both promise and sacrifice. What am I meant to choose? He asked, his voice trembling with the enormity of it. The oracle's eyes softened, a faint, enigmatic smile gracing her lips. Only you can answer that, Prince Kian. The sands reveal, but they do not decide. Destiny may weave the threads, but it is you who must walk the path. Kian felt the weight of her words settle within him, like a seed planted in the depths of his heart. He knew now that his choices mattered, that he held within him the power to shape not only his own life, but the lives of all those connected to him. And as he stood there beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, he felt a quiet resolve, a determination to walk forward with purpose, knowing that the sands of time would forever remember his steps. The desert was silent, holding its breath as Prince Kian lingered in the sands, the weight of destiny pressing upon him like an invisible shroud. The visions had slipped away, but their memory pulsed within him, echoing with the silent promise of futures both bright and sorrowful. He could feel the threads of fate woven tightly around him, each strand tugging at his heart, pulling him in different directions. The oracle remained by his side, her gaze steady and patient, as though she knew what lay within him, even before he himself did. She watched as he grappled with the knowledge he had gained, the weight of choices yet to be made. And though her expression was as impassive as ever, there was a faint sadness in her eyes, a sorrow born of countless ages spent witnessing the burdens of those who sought the sands. "Must I choose?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. "Must I walk these paths and bear these sorrows?" The oracle's voice was soft, like the murmur of the wind over the dunes. "Each life is a thread, Kian. woven into a tapestry that stretches across time. To turn away is to unravel the thread, to leave gaps in the fabric that destiny has woven. But to walk the path is to accept both the beauty and the weight of what lies ahead. Kian looked down at his hands, imagining the threads woven through his very skin, binding him to the people he loved, to the kingdom he would one day rule, to the unknown woman he had seen only in glimpses. He felt as though he were on the edge of a great precipice, teetering between fear and acceptance, between the desire to turn back and the pull to step forward. And then he felt it, a faint pulse within him, a gentle warmth that spread through his chest, quiet but unyielding. It was the memory of those he had seen in his visions, the faces of his people, his family, and the strangers whose lives would one day intertwine with his own. He thought of the children laughing in the valley, of the warriors who had followed him with unwavering loyalty, of the woman whose eyes had held both love and loss. They were all bound to him, as he was bound to them. And in that realization, he found a strength he had not known he possessed. He lifted his gaze to the oracle, his voice steady and calm. I will walk the path. Whatever it may hold, I will bear it, for their sake as well as my own. The oracle's face softened, a flicker of approval passing over her features. Then you are ready, Prince Kian. You have seen what lies in the sands, and now you must carry that knowledge with you, knowing that every step you take will shape the lives of others. But remember, even as you walk forward, that the sands do not bind, they only reveal. With a slight nod, she gestured to the sands around him, which began to swirl and shift, forming patterns that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. The desert was alive, its essence woven into the fabric of time, its sands carrying the memories of every life that had ever touched its surface. The wind began to rise, carrying with it whispers from the past and future, voices that seemed to come from the sands themselves, filling the air with a haunting melodic hum. Kian could feel the weight of their presence, the countless lives that had crossed the glistening sands before him, each one leaving a trace upon the desert, a faint echo that would linger for eternity. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the swirling sands grew still, the voices fading into silence. Kian found himself standing alone in the desert, the oracle gone, her form dissolved into the night like a passing dream. The air was calm, the stars above steady and bright, as though nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Kian looked around, feeling the cool weight of the sand beneath his feet, the vast empty sky stretching above him. He could still feel the faint pull of the threads that bound him to his destiny. Yet he also felt a strange freedom, a lightness he had not expected. The oracle's words echoed in his mind. The sands do not bind, they only reveal. He realized in that moment that though the sands had shown him the paths that lay before him, they had not dictated his choices. The visions had been glimpses, possibilities woven from the threads of time, but it was he who would shape them, who would decide which path to walk and which threads to weave into his life. With a quiet resolve, he turned away from the heart of the desert, his steps steady as he began the journey back to his kingdom. The sands glittered in the moonlight, their glow a faint reminder of the visions he had seen, of the futures he might create, of the lives he would touch. And though he knew he would carry the weight of his choices with him, he also knew that he was not alone, that every step he took would leave a mark, a thread woven into the tapestry of time. As he walked, the desert began to fade, its shimmering sands dissolving into the night. He could feel the memories slipping away, not in sorrow, but as though they were returning to the sands from which they had come. And though he knew he would remember only fragments, faint echoes of what he had seen, he felt no regret. The knowledge he had gained, the glimpses of his destiny, were etched into his heart, a quiet strength that would guide him in the years to come. When he reached the edge of his kingdom, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. The desert behind him lay silent, its secrets hidden once more beneath the sands. Kian stood at the threshold of his home, his heart steady, his mind calm. He knew now that his path would not be easy, that his choices would carry both joy and sorrow, that he would one day face the woman whose eyes had held both love and pain. But he was ready, for he had seen the threads of his destiny, and he knew that he held within him the power to shape them, to create a future worthy of those who had walked the sands before him. And as he stepped forward, the sands of time fell silent, their glistening secrets carried on the wind, bound to the heart of a prince, who would forever be marked by the desert's mystery. A man who had glimpsed the threads of destiny and found himself within them.